Welcome to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership, where you'll hear insights and useful strategies, as well as lessons learned from other nonprofit leaders and valuable tips from a variety of experts. Here to help you with the challenges and opportunities you face day after day is your host and nonprofit leadership expert, Sarah Olivieri.
Hello, nonprofit leaders, and welcome to your go-to place for information and inspiration to be even more effective. I'm your host, Sarah Olivieri, and this is the Inspired Nonprofit Leadership Podcast. Today, I have a special guest, Patrick Hardy, who is an expert in disasters. So wherever disaster and disruption strike, there are few voices in the world as knowledgeable as Patrick. He is the author of several books, including Design Any Disaster, The Revolutionary Blueprint to Master Your Next Crisis or Emergency. He is certified in FEMA's Advanced Academy, as well as FEMA's Master of Exercise, Certified Emergency Manager, Certified Risk Manager, and Master Business Continuity Professional. We're going to dive right in. Patrick, welcome. And before we start talking about how to manage disaster, would you share something fun or interesting about yourself personally so our audience can get to know you as a whole person?
Last year in September, I decided, let me go back. A year prior to that, I decided I wanted to do something a little different because I'd broken a number of world records in push-ups. And I thought, I need to do something that's different, something that's going to challenge me a little bit differently than I had in the past. And so what I decided to do was I was going to break the world record for the longest CPR marathon ever. And so, and the record at the time was 26 hours. And I said, I'm going to beat that record. So I spent a year, I worked with my trainer. And yes, there was a training program. We designed a nutrition program, psychological, everything. And I broke it. I ended up doing CPR for over 28 hours. So, and we submitted it to Guinness, and it should be certified as a record, we're hoping, in the next couple of weeks. And so I did that. So I did CPR for a really long period of time. It was the longest day of my life, I honestly want to say, but it was more CPR than I ever expected. But you get a lot of perspective on how hard physically CPR is, and people don't realize that can be a very physically exhausting process. But it was wonderful. I have it all. If you want to follow my journey on there, I have it on my YouTube channel. And in fact, in about a week from this recording, today's the 8th, I would think by the 15th, we will actually have the video, which encompasses the entire journey from beginning to end, including the record and what happened immediately afterwards.
What an interesting thing. I'm curious, before we move into disasters or the connection there, what were some of the aha moments or surprising insights that you had as you went through this journey?
That this was not a physical journey as much as it was going to be a psychological journey. That is what made it really difficult, because when you are doing something like this, it's a journey where you're saying, how in the world am I going to be able to work and continue to do this all the way through the night? And what ended up happening was about 8 hours in, something very strange happened. I could no longer walk. So people had to carry me. They give you very short breaks. And on the breaks, I had friends who just happened to be stopping by because I told them, please come support me. I did this in San Francisco. So I said, and I had a number of friends in the Bay Area, and they agreed to come at like 11:30 at night. I mean, who knew? And I literally had people carrying me to the break room because the feeling in my legs was entirely gone. In fact, my left leg is still numb, even though this is months later. So we're sort of, I'm doing everything I can to kind of get the feeling back. So that was one of the main challenges. And the other thing is, you don't realize this, which is I was eating throughout. And I started getting massive heartburn because when you're leaning over so much, if you eat anything at all and then you're leaning over, your body, that is a very, very unnatural position. And so what I had to do is we had to adapt. So I literally lived on Gatorade for almost 20 hours. And so it was really amazing. And you're just trying to find things to do. And so luckily I watched a lot of Netflix. I watched a lot of Hulu. I caught up on all these programs I'd wanted to watch. I hadn't watched all the seasons of these now Netflix shows I really liked. And so I just thought, I'm gonna go ahead and do that thing. So I watched Stranger Things. I watched like 3 seasons of Stranger Things.
Excellent. So let's talk about your overall, like when you think about being prepared for disasters, and especially for nonprofit leaders who are out
Mhm.
there listening, can you kind of frame up how they should be thinking about being ready for disasters and handling disasters when they come?
When I talk with them, I say, look, everybody talks about having, big voluminous disaster plans and going to, the FEMA website to get a disaster plan. I say, don't worry about all that stuff. Don't worry about all that. Here's what I want you to focus on instead. I want you to focus on the 5 major elements that make your nonprofit work. Okay, so I call it really the 5 pocket system because when I talk about individuals, it's the same thing. I talk about, here are the 5 things you need to have with you at all times, anywhere you go, whatever you're doing, and maintaining your options so you always have access to those 5 things. And so when I talk to nonprofit leaders, I say, when you look at your nonprofit, I just ask them, what makes your nonprofit work? What are the things that make it happen? In other words, what do you have to have in process in order to continue to operate and protect those 5 things at all costs? That's what I want you to do. So if, for example, let's say fundraising is a critical thing, I'm just going to make this up. So let's say you had to have that all year round. You have to have fundraising year round. Then I say, whatever you're doing, whether you're evacuating, whether you're sheltering in place, whether you're locking down, whatever, you need to make sure that that mechanism is still in place. Is the website working? Are all the other elements I need to have in order for that to continue to go? View of operations, if you have to be in an office, okay, fine. Then make sure you have backup offices, or or I don't care, you can meet at a Starbucks. I've literally have companies and nonprofits that I say, they go, well, I don't know where to meet. I go, just go to the Starbucks. It has air conditioning, it has food, it has drink, it has caffeine, it has all the things that we need to operate every day-to-day basis. But protecting those 5 things, I find that all nonprofits really have, 5 operational things in general, and this is true for a lot of small businesses. I've worked with so many of them, that if you protect those 5 things, then you will continue to be in business, so to speak. You'll continue to be able to operate regardless of that. So don't worry about creating, 300-page disaster plans or trying to sort out all the different things. You guys have simple operations for the most part. So when you do that, just think of the 5 critical things that your business must have to continue to operate. Think of them as like pockets in your pants. So we have like Levi jeans, and there's the 2 in the front, there's 2 in the back, and there's that little one like on the side there. I always say, always think about what are the sort of the 5 things and make it so that if you have to evacuate somewhere, can the 5 pockets in your pants or the 5 pockets in your backpack or your purse, whatever, can they help you as you are evacuating? Or is it such that you can't do that? Because if you can't do that, if there's some operation where you say, I have to be somewhere, then okay, fine. So then know that you need to go to the Starbucks, or you need to go to the, this other location, whatever it happens to be. That is how you really prepare for disasters, because disasters really, and the most resilient organizations that I work with and I design programs for, it all distills down, Sarah, to one thing and one thing only: maintaining options. Maintaining your options. So when I talk to nonprofit leaders, I say, listen, if you have to evacuate, just like what's going on in Los Angeles right now, if they have to evacuate somewhere and they want to be in business because they want to help people, I say, then let's get you back up just like that. And the way we're going to do that is, if we have to evacuate somewhere, do you still have access to those 5 things? That's going to be so important.
Yeah, what incredible advice, and tangible and accessible. I want to ask you a simple but not so simple, sometimes simple but not easy question, because so many nonprofit leaders, they feel like they talk about the fires that they're always putting out, right? Not the literal fires.
The fires. And
uh
sometimes
but
literal ones too.
That's right. Sometimes the literal ones too. And in my work with them, some of the things I find we're often doing is saying, like, these things are not actually emergencies. These things are not actually disasters, but you're responding to them as though they are. And so I want to ask you, what's a disaster?
A disaster is anything that disrupts your operations. So what I tell people is, going back to those 5 things, is whatever is happening to you, is it impacting any one of those 5 things? If it is impacting those 5 things, what I tell my clients is, if it's a disaster for you, then it's a disaster for me. I'll tell you this. One time I was working with this RV park up in Yosemite. It's a beautiful park, lovely location. I do a number of RV parks up there. They're absolutely incredible. And if you're thinking these are like, rundown places, they are not. These people have yurts, these beautiful yurts. They have these beautiful locations. They have this great clubhouse, everything. So one night, my center got a call in the middle of the night. And this is a few years ago, and they called and they said, we're having a disaster. We need to activate the disaster plan. We said, so what have you done so far? How can we help you? And they said, they said, we don't know what to do. And we said, well, what's the disaster? And they said, tonight is the final episode of Game of Thrones, and everyone is trying to stream it, and the internet has gone down, and so we have 50 people calling the main center and waking up our employees in the middle of the night, angry as to why we don't have internet. And so we said, okay, that's a disaster for you and that's a disaster for us, because for small businesses, when you have a lot of customers that are upset, then that's a disruption for them, because one of the critical 5 things for most small businesses is customer service. So if customers are not happy, a few reviews saying, hey, listen, these people promised me internet access, because if you've ever been up to Yosemite, it's an incredible place, but there's absolutely no internet hardly anywhere. In fact, there's no cell phone coverage for the vast majority of the area, even today. And because I was up there recently. And one of the things that I say is I say, if it's important and it impacts one of those 5 areas, then you have to ensure that your disaster plan does the same. So that's why we make sure it's nimble enough to say, it doesn't have to be a wildfire or hurricane or earthquake. If it's 500 people trying to stream Game of Thrones and your internet goes down, okay, that's a disaster.
There you go. So how do you like to help people create their disaster plans? And I'd love to hear some stories, and I think you have some interesting activities that you do with folks.
Yeah, what I do is I start by saying to everybody, I'll take when I'm training everyone, I'll put all the employees in a room and I'll say, who do you think in a disaster is going to be in charge? Who thinks going to be in charge? And they always point to the manager, the owner, the CEO. That's what they always say. And they always say, oh, so-and-so is going to handle it, or Sarah's going to handle it. She's in charge. She's the one that's handling it. And I go, okay, fine. All right. I said, all right, that's fine. I understand. And then what I do is I run a drill. And Sarah, this is what I do all the time. So I'll run a drill, have the people in the room, there'll be about 50 people in the room, and I'll say, okay, all right, so who's been here the least amount of time? Who is the newest employee here? Who's the person who knows the least about our operations? Who is that person precisely? And then I'll inevitably get somebody in the back who's always terrified, and they're always trying to avoid my gaze, and that's the person in the very, very back. And I will say, you're in charge today of this disaster response. And everybody freaks out and they go, but how can so-and-so do it? So-and-so's brand new. And I say, if the person who is newest can't activate the disaster plan, no one can. No one can. Because that person may be the person who's on duty at a time when an earthquake strikes. Earthquakes will strike at 3 a.m. and managers aren't there. And so I say, you have to empower people. So Sarah, this is the message, and this is what I start with every single business, whether it's a restaurant, a nursing home, a bar, a alligator farm. Yes, I've done one of those. I mean, all kinds of companies. And when I work with them, I say the first thing is, does everything you do, from your planning to your equipment and everything, does it empower employees to activate the program? Because one of the worst things that can happen to your business is no one does anything. Because if you disempower the employees, they all just turn into a bunch of lemmings. They'll just stand around. They don't know what to do. No one has any clue. And so it becomes a real mess. And that becomes a serious problem. And so that's one of the things that I always say to people. I always say, so when we're in those situations, the first thing that we absolutely have to do is make sure that people are empowered. And the difference with most planners than me is I actually don't start with the disaster plan. I actually start with equipment. I start with stuff because people like stuff. And so I say, instead of focusing specifically on the various provisions of the disaster plan. The disaster plan does this, the disaster plan does that. I look at the equipment and say, let's start with those 5 pockets. Does this backpack, and what I'll literally do with nonprofits is I'll say, I have a red backpack here. And so in this backpack, can we operate this nonprofit from this backpack? If we can't operate this business from this backpack, what's the point of having a big detailed disaster plan? So the disaster plan then flows from the equipment. So that's the way I've always done it, to make sure that people can rely on it from there. And that's what empowers employees. Because then literally what I'll do is, I've done this many times, Sarah. I went on a morning show a few weeks ago. I literally took a backpack and they said, they gave me a backpack and they said, how would you evaluate and how would you start a disaster program with this backpack? And I took out a knife and I cut the bottom of the backpack out and I tore the backpack out and everything came pouring out and, on the floor. And I said, that's how you start. I say, I'm seeing equipment that no one's ever opened. I see batteries that are really old that no one has ever tested before. I see food that no one has ever tried before. So you were asking about a story. I was at an RV park. I was doing a program for someone. I had a free afternoon. I was just walking around and somebody said to me, hey, listen, would you just take a look at this backpack we have? Because we're going to have it. We're going across the country. We just retired. We're going to, you've heard the refrain before. We're going around the country. We're going to do all that. And I said, sure. I'll be happy to take a look. And so we looked through the backpack and I went through various things and I did exactly what I did here. I dumped the backpack out. I didn't take a knife and cut it open. I dumped it out and we went through everything. And then I noticed something. I noticed there was one of those hockey puck foods. That's what I call it, because it's like it's like an MRE, right? So I actually took that and I took a knife and I cut it open and I actually took it. It's like a bar and I cut it into pieces. And people were like, well, they were like, well, what are you doing? And I said, I'm making you lunch. He said, what do you mean? I said, we're going to eat this right now. They're like, why are we going to eat this now? I said, because if you don't try it, we don't know how you're going to have it. And you know what ended up happening? He turned to me and said, we can't eat this. He looked at the package and he said, we can't eat this. So why not? He said, she has to be on a gluten-free diet and I have a dietary restriction. I can't eat this. There's like an ingredient in there.
So
He's like, I can't have.
Because I'm gluten-free and I worry about scenarios where I'm stuck. Because I've been stuck at the doctor's office. Like, when they take blood and if you get lightheaded, they give you some apple juice or all the food they have in the doctor's office is gluten. And so now I know to always bring my own food just in case, because I know they're not prepared. Anyway, that's
beautiful. You know what, Sarah?
That is real.
That's a beautiful story. I'll tell you why. Because you've recognized one of the 5 things you have to have, obviously, is what we call the personal, right? So there's personal stuff. And one of the things is food, right? And so what I tell people is I always say, carry something with you at all times, whether you're at school, whether you're at work, whether you're at the doctor's office doing a blood test, something so that you're not reliant on them to do the planning for you. Because if you do that, now you're stuck. And that's what I tell people with the backpack. I go, basically what you've done, they go, well, I bought the backpack. I'm empowered. I said, no. You let Walmart fill that backpack. You've never opened it. You don't even know what's in it. So really you're relying on Walmart to do your disaster planning for you. And that's not what we want to do, right? So we want to have it as empowered as possible, as individualized as possible. So when we think about those 5 things within the nonprofit world, within those 5 pockets, we say everything we're doing has to be things that are empowering us in these responses. Or, if we're traveling around the country, freshly retired, and we're traveling around, food is going to be important if we're going into tornado country, if we're going into hurricane country. So we always have to have something in place that puts us in a position where we can be successful without having to rely on other people to do it for us.
And I love how simple your approach is. It reminds me of, I think of business essentials for my own small business. Many years ago when my son was 5, I think, I made the mistake. I had my computer, my laptop, and I had my earbuds. And I made the mistake of putting my earbuds down on my computer and leaving it open on the couch while I ran to the bathroom. Wow. And I come back and my son had closed the laptop on the headphones, cracking the screen. Oh. And I was like, oh my God, I need for me, it was the computer I needed for work. Mm-hmm. But I borrowed a friend's computer and I realized that 90% of everything I did was already in the cloud. And I said, I never want to be, it's easy to break a computer. And I was like, I never want to have computer breaking be a disaster again. So I just made this intentional shift, which wasn't really that big, to move all of the tools that I use into the cloud. I just had to switch from like Apple Pages to Google Docs and a few other things. And now I have this peace of mind. I know, because so many people's businesses are, on their computers. I can go to any computer in the world, log into Chrome, and my whole ecosystem reemerges. And, it felt like a big disaster, but once I addressed what are the real pieces here, it was really a simple change. It took a few small tweaks. And now I feel prepared because, if nobody can find a computer anywhere, then we've got a whole different problem. But I'm not dependent on my computer anymore.
Well, that's great. And that's absolutely perfect. What you did is the perfect response, which is you identified one of the 5 things that you absolutely have to have access to. And in that, you say I have to have access to, these applications. I have to have access to this data. I have to have access to these critical documents. And those are the things that you're going to emphasize. And you say, as a result of that, I want to make sure that I can access those things rapidly and that I can do them from anywhere. And therefore, anywhere you go, you've basically maximized your options, right? You've said whether I'm here or on the steppes of Tibet, I can still access it. So one of those 5 things, the 5 pockets that we have of my business, I can always access that pocket from anywhere I need to go to, even if I can do it on my phone. I literally have a small business I work with. They can operate entirely with their phone. I mean, it's not perfect. I mean, it's not ideal. But I mean, certainly for enough time to be able to ensure that they're still operating during a difficult period, they'll take the little bit of inconvenience versus not having it at all. And now we're really in trouble because we're losing revenue and you only have a very, very short period of time. I mean, even with nonprofits, I treat nonprofits like small businesses. I tell them, you're basically a small business. And I say to them, I need to get you back as fast as possible because I need you not only back operating, I want you to keep doing your wonderful work. And in disasters, there are a lot of people who don't do any preparation, that none of the 5 pockets are ready for other people. So you have to help fill those pockets for other people. And whether you're doing that through search and rescue, or whether you're doing that through housing, or whether you're doing it through access to government resources, whatever those things are, I want you doing those things as rapidly as possible. That's why you went into this. So I'm here to empower you to maximize your options when no one thinks there's any options left.
I think that is so critical. And I want to go back, just for those nonprofit leaders listening, to you happen to use fundraising as an example of something that they might need to have to keep being able to do in a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
And you were actually hit on what I think is really, really key, and where I've seen nonprofits. I'll never forget, in the early days of the pandemic, I sent an email out to my email list. And all of a sudden, I got a huge number of, they weren't bounced emails, they were auto reply messages from development directors saying, I no longer work here, basically. And because so many nonprofits had this response of, things are going to be uncertain, let me fire my development director. And I was like, that's like the first thing you should prioritize, because you're going to need money. You should absolutely cut everything else. Stop all your programming, unless, of course, you're like a life or death services.
Right.
But whatever you do,
Right.
don't stop your your money coming in, because that you need that. It is a critical resource for operating, right? You need money. And so I know you kind of pulled that one out of a hat, because probably people think about nonprofits and fundraising, but that is really critical thing. And I would encourage, certainly nonprofits can run on reserves if they have them for a bit, but don't throw your fundraising capacity out as a first step. Like, that's something that's really important to keep, I think. So I just want to
and in addition to, well, and you're absolutely right. And in addition to that is, I tell people, I tell nonprofit leaders all the time, I say the disaster is a great opportunity for you to raise more money, because people right now are focused on this and they're willing to donate. So not only if you're prepared with those 5 pockets, in other words, if one of those is fundraising, and you're right, I think it probably is for most people. If it is, if you prepare early enough, now when something happens, a disruptive event, an earthquake, a fire, whatever's going on, looks like what's going on in Los Angeles, then immediately you can actually advertise. If you prep in advance, I actually have a nonprofit I work with that when a disaster occurs, they actually have an advertising campaign already laid out so that they actually increase their donations during this period of time, because people are trying to say, how can I, people nationally, how can I help? How can I do this? How can I do that? And during hurricanes, this is a big deal, especially because it tends to hit areas, people who are, have a difficulty, they're in a lower socioeconomic strata, and so they have a lot of difficulty recovering, and they were reliant on the public sector, so they're reliant on government to provide things, but they're also reliant on individuals and nonprofits to help them. So that's one of the reasons why I think it's so important that nonprofits not only be prepared for it, but it's more than just saying being prepared. It's being in a position you have maximized your options no matter what's going on around you.
I think, if people are taking one thing away, like that is the thing that I'm hearing, like keeping your options open. And that's to me why keeping your funding, your ability to generate funding open is so important, is because money keeps options open. I spent some time in college traveling in Africa, and there was almost nothing, if you needed to open a door, $20 US bill could do
Wow.
just about anything for you,
Wow.
so you always, money opened doors. You could literally pay the public bus to take you somewhere privately, and they'd be like, okay, now instead of going to the city, we're going
Wow.
to the beach, and anybody who wants to go to the beach can stay on, and anyone
Wow.
who thought they were going to the city and still needs to go should
That's
get
a cool
off now,
story.
because someone just bought the bus. Is it an
Wow.
opportunity? Is it a disaster? Depends who you were on the bus. But yeah, like I think, keeping your options open is so, so important. And I'm going to do some thinking about this for my own business, but also I'm a sailboat racer, where we get into, self-imposed. I mean, the weather often can impose a disaster, but we have to be prepared a lot. And I'm used to being prepared, but there's always more better stuff to do to make the sailing safer
And when I work with
in a
sales, when I work with
disaster.
people who are on these sort of long distance trips, I work with some high net worth clients where that's one of the things they like to do is I say, okay, just because we're on a catamaran or just because you're on a sailboat, a competitive sailboat, whatever, one of the things you need to do is always think about those 5 things. Always think about the 5 things that are going to ensure that you can continue. I'm just making this up. You're continuing the race, continuing the journey. And if you say, I don't have enough here to get me through the entire thing, that's okay. Have just enough of the 5 to get you to a place that will improve access to those 5 things. Then you can go back on your journey. So it's, I think of it like a node, like you're going from place to place. So that I tell people, wherever you are, whether you're in the middle of the Atlantic or whether you always have some kind of infrastructure system where you have enough of the 5 pockets to get to somewhere else that will improve those 5 things. Because those 5 things are what is going to ensure that you are disaster proof. And that's why I talk about designing the disaster, because I tell people, you design it around you. Don't let the winds dictate what happens to you. You dictate it based on the winds are going to do what it's going to do. I'm not going to be affected because I have these things in my 5 pockets. I have my 5 operations, or if you're a person, the 5 things that are important to me. And those are the things that are going to continue to allow you to live your life versus having some, voluminous disaster plan that A, nobody's going to read, B, nobody cares about, C, it's going to gather dust, and so I just tell people, I say, if you focus on that stuff, no matter where you are, I even say this to high school kids. I say, listen, you in the 5 pockets of your clothes, you literally can have these 5 things, and I lay them out and I talk with them about it. And that's really what you're doing, the same thing when you're sailing, when you're by yourself. I actually dated a quartermaster in college, and she was always really careful about making sure she had enough things whenever she was traveling and going on long trips. So I think that's a very good approach.
Sailors are used to that, right? I
Yeah,
always
they
have
are.
my knife, but we also
Yep.
always keep a boat knife that everyone, because not everybody, the newer sailors don't always have it. And I say, here's the boat knife. It's quickly accessible.
Mhm.
If you needed to cut something, because you can get a
Right.
lot of tension up when the wind is up
No,
on
I
things,
know.
and sometimes everybody knows where it is. And we always do man overboard preparation information every time somebody new comes on the boat, because someone could go over. And my dad once, when I was not on the boat, he's in his 70s, he went overboard. And of course, he then was directing what to do from the water. And as I was like, this is no good. And I was researching real man overboard situations. And I found a lot of situations where it was the captain or the skipper who had gone over and no one else was ready to take over. And in one situation, that person had gone over and they had all sorts of sophisticated computer systems. That was an ocean race. But the person who'd gone over had there was like a passcode and a device that you put the passcode on, and he had it with him, and nobody else knew the code, and they couldn't access any of their sophisticated instruments. And I was like, oh, definitely take note. Everybody needs to be able to use the tools, just like you said. Anybody needs to be able to do the basic things.
That's a great point. That's a wonderful point. And I really want to emphasize, because that's a wonderful point. Because one of the things I say to people all the time is I say, whenever I run a drill, the first thing I do is I always tell the managers, you're out of it for the first half hour. You literally are not here. And they always freak out. They go, whoa, you expect my employees to do it? I go, yeah.
Mhm.
So you expect them to do all this stuff in the disaster program? Yeah. Now you have to do that, because there are going to be instances where you're with your kids, you're on jury duty, you're in the Bahamas, whatever. And then the employees have to be able to access these things and be able to do it in an easy way. It's one of the reasons why I emphasize equipment, because particularly in California, you'll have who don't speak English as well. We have people who can't read sophisticated disaster plans. I know that sounds strange, but there are people that literally can't do that. And so when I emphasize it, and I emphasize the 5 things, I say, make sure people have the passcodes. Make sure that so that if somebody goes overboard, then we have the ability to continue to operate, because the sophisticated equipment just becomes a paperweight. I say to people all the time, if you don't have the right way of accessing it, in other words, if people can't access those 5 things, it just becomes a weight. It just weighs you down. And it isn't helpful for anybody. So that's one of the things I think is really important for people to know. So that's a wonderful story. And by the way, sir, I'm going to steal that story. I'm going to tell it. I'm speaking in a few weeks, and so and to a bunch of insurance professionals, and they deal with marine work. And so I'm going to tell that story, because that is so important for people to know, that you've got to have each one of those planks whenever you are involving yourself in anything, whether it's a boat race, whether you're just in the marina or whatever. So yeah.
Well, wonderful. Well, it has been such a pleasure to have you here, Patrick. You clearly have such a wealth of knowledge. If people are interested in working with you or getting your books, who should be reaching out, and what's the best way to do that?
Anyone can reach out. If you're a nonprofit leader, I invite you to reach out to me. It's disasterpatrick.com. No weird spelling, Patrick like the saint. So disasterpatrick.com. And one of the things I'm looking for nonprofits is we are looking to do some unique disaster challenges with you. And one of the things I do as a thank you is I create your disaster program for you. So I'll literally go there, and then after I will shoot a video for YouTube, and then right afterwards, I'll make sure to give you guys a program, and I'll train your staff on it too. So that's because one of the things we did last year was I worked with a cat sanctuary, and I evacuated 240 cats in 90 minutes. And so I took that as a disaster challenge, and it was really fun. It's actually online for those of you who want to watch the video. It's on my YouTube channel, again, Disaster Patrick. And I talk about all the different things we had to do. We had to write a quick disaster plan. I wrote it on this big white sheet of paper because we didn't have one. So we just wrote a few things. We said, we're going to do this, 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 and this. No, you'll be able to recognize that it's basically the 5 things that cats have to have in order to be evacuated. And so I worked with their staff. It was a lot of fun. Would love to work with you as well. I love supporting the nonprofit industry. Everything you all do is so important to our communities, and I would love to support you in any way I can. So reach out to me. Even if you don't know what challenge you want me to do, just reach out to us. My team will develop. I've got an incredible group of people who would love to be able to develop something, and then it's free marketing and advertising for you. So anything I can do, I would love to support you. So Sarah, thank you for having me. I enjoyed this very much. I was glad that we could have this talk today because this is such an important issue. So I'm really glad to have been able to do it. And I got some great stories from you as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Patrick. And thank you out there for listening and for all that you do. This podcast is here to support you. And in addition, we have the Inspired Nonprofit Leadership newsletter, where you get one actionable tip in your email every week. And you can access that at inspirednonprofitleadership.com/sign up. Until next time, take care of yourself, take some time for that self-care, and think about your 5 things for your disaster readiness. Until then, all the best.
You've been listening to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode or the bonus episodes. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review, and be sure to share with your friends and colleagues. Tune in every week for more useful insights and wisdom on nonprofit leadership. Thanks so much for all you do for the communities you serve. Until next time, all the best.